All right. Ricky was a young boy who had the second most terrible day of his life one morning in the middle of May. He awoke to the sound of his father arguing with his uncle over breakfast.
Why on earth would you take the last Pop-Tart?
Ricky heard his father's muffled cries through the floorboard. He got out of bed and dressed quickly. He didn't want to be dragged into the conflict unfolding in the kitchen. Ricky climbed down the drain pipe outside his window after getting ready. He casually walked towards the front of the house and to the end of the driveway. As he passed the porch, he heard the front door open and slam shut. His father's voice carried out through the open door, just enough to allow his "Get out!" to ring out into the driveway.
Ricky.
Owen had a cool way of saying Ricky's name. Ricky smiled.
I told your parents that you got up and left early.
Owen smiled, a dumb grin, like we had just gotten away with something.
By the way, here's a tenner. Can you get some Pop-Tarts on the way home from school? I may have pissed your dad off a bit.
Owen handed him a $10 bill. Ricky took it with a breath of relief. Sure thing, Uncle Owen. I'll get his favorite. Ricky was happy that his uncle was trying so hard to deal with his unreasonable dad. He was always arguing about something or other. Owen, on the other hand, calmed Ricky and gave his calm soul restitute from his home of shouting. On the way to school, Ricky spied his friend George sitting under a tree. "What are you doing, George?" Ricky asked. "I can't do it," George replied sullenly. "Can't do what?" Ricky replied, knowing exactly what he meant. "I can't walk all the way to school. My feet are sore already, and we ain't halfway there." "George, you believe in God, correct?" said Ricky.
"Do you?"
George asked. "Of course," Ricky lied. "I believe in him because I believe in you. You can do this, George. You just need to believe in yourself." George stood up and picked his bag.
"Ricky, why are you so hard to disagree with?"
George asked. "Because I'm right, George. Now come on. Please." Ricky started walking ahead. George struggled to catch up. After school, Ricky made George walk with him to the corner store. George complained at first, but Ricky was able to convince him. George asked Ricky questions about what was and wasn't because he didn't know. Ricky answered honestly, giving whatever scraps of real truth he could between his vast imaginations of how the world worked. George hung on every word, and Ricky relished the feeling of being listened to. On the way home, he split with George at the same place they had met up. Ricky wondered if going to the extra trouble was worth the extra trouble after all. It's worth it, he thought, to put an end to the fighting. As he crossed the threshold of his home road, he smelt the smoke before he saw it. Or the fire. Ricky pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. He stood there on the phone with the fire alight in his eyes. The lady on the phone told him to stay on the line until help arrived. Ricky stood there, speechless, staring at the pyre. "It's reached the second floor now," he said on the line. "By the time they get here, it'll be too late." The operator said, "It may not be," but it was. As the fire truck rounded the bend, the foundation collapsed, and ash speckled Ricky's gentle face. He sat on the crowd and tried not to let the smoke make him cry. The firemen were there to put out the smoldering remains and keep Ricky safe until an adult could arrive. He wouldn't want me crying when he gets here, Ricky thought. He never got there. He was in the house. So was his mom. When he was told this by the firemen, he let the smoke make his eyes wet with tears, but he didn't wail or sob. At the funeral, Ricky weaved through the crowds, avoiding all the different relatives and friends that were looking for the tears in his eyes. They weren't there. Once he found his Uncle Owen, Ricky stuck by his side the whole time, letting him take the brunt of people's questions and comments. After making a few rounds, Owen took Ricky outside and let him have a bit of a drink from his hip flask. The taste was painful, but Ricky asked for another sip. Whew. Sometime later, a man from beyond space, time, and everything arrives on Earth, a region of space that many would call everyday normal reality. But to him, it's a kaleidoscope of complex systems and engagements. At the center of that kaleidoscope, he finds a town that sits at a high potential energy for exacerbating change, like a ball that sits high up next to a steep slope. In this settlement, the man thought, I just need to find that ball and get it rolling. The ball being proverbial. Rolling also proverbial. Metaphorically speaking, the ball is the object that enacts the change of energy. Literally speaking, the ball is Ricky. Sometime later, it ended up being 5 years. Ricky woke up to the sound of a Chopin on violin choking through... a Chopin on vinyl. Sorry, I forgot that it was vinyl. Choking through the floorboards. Between the uneven spin of the old record player and the wear and tear from being played every morning, it flavored each morning with a sense of dark melancholy. At least for Ricky. Beneath the sounds of the stilted notes of the orchestra, Ricky could hear his uncle belting off-key to the beat of the song. He grabbed his headphones and cranked the volume on his already quite loud music. He walked downstairs and into the kitchen, looking for a meal. He found the Pop-Tarts empty and looked at his Uncle Owen shaking his arms ecstatically, trying to get him to take off his headphones. I don't trust you to ever not say something stupid, so I'm just gonna leave these in, okay? Ricky said deftly to his uncle, who looked like his inflatable wacky arms had just deflated. He took out his headphones and looked at his uncle to see what was so important. Ricky! So, before you go, I just wanted to ask you about these YouTube influencers, and if you think that maybe I could do it? Owen pulled out a picture of himself wearing sunglasses in the car with the large text bad at the top and ass at the bottom. I stand by what I said before, Ricky said, laughing despite himself. As he went to leave, he grabbed a tenner from the table in the kitchen. With nothing to eat at home, Ricky would need to find sustenance elsewhere. The strip mall was barren and strip. There was only one corner market and a yoga studio. The rest of the storefronts were empty. Inside the corner market, Ricky picked up a Hot Pocket and took it to the microwave. He entered 159 and pressed start. They say 9 is the least used button on a microwave. A voice startled Ricky from behind. What difference is 1 second? Ricky was bewildered that an old man wearing heart-shaped sunglasses had come over to chide him about his microwaving habits. What's it matter? He retorted. I'd like to be the reason that statistic changes. Just as he finished speaking, he noticed that the microwave was beeping. He was confused. He had only put it in a few seconds before, but it was already saying it was finished. He opened the microwave and poked the edge of the frozen food, only to find that it wasn't frozen, but was instead fully cooked. What's the statistic for fastest cooked Hot Pocket? The man asked. Ricky looked back and forth at the man and the food, wondering if he had just imagined that time had flown by, or if the microwave was supercharged. I get it. You're doing street magic. Really cool. I'd rather not sign my name on any releases, though, so maybe save it for the old Chinese lady who comes by every morning for a heated scone. She always talks about getting on TV. Ricky pointed at Glenda. That's disappointing to hear, the man replied. I was hoping you'd let me finish my show. Ricky thought about the time. I'm gonna be late for school as is. It's almost 8. Ricky looked at the clock as he said this, only to notice the second hand was slowing down between each tick. He looked at the cashier clerk to ask if the clock was slow, just in time to see him sneezing. He watched as the cashier sneezed for an uninterrupted 12 seconds. It was like a slow-motion video. Ricky was baffled and, in panic, ran to the door. Birds had gathered around the garbage outside. As he pushed the door open, the birds slowly turned their heads before opening the wings. The birds took flight and looked as if they were ascending through the air, like gravity didn't exist. "I think we have time," the man said, appearing next to Ricky. "I only need a few minutes." Ricky pondered what was happening for a moment. Was this man really here? He slapped his cheeks and felt the blood rush to his face. He felt sober. There was no way he was drugged. This man. Could he be? "Are you God?" Ricky asked. "No," the man answered. "I am Occam." Ricky followed Occam as he opened the door to one of the empty store fronts. Inside, the floor was pulled out in spots, revealing the concrete foundation. The paint on the walls was stained brown in spots from water damage. The lights in the ceilings were pulled out with cables, dangling where they once were. The store should have been an ugly place, if not for the dust. As they walked, the dust in the room stirred and rose into the air. The light from the morning sun streaming into the windows lit each of the particles, and you could see the dust delicately swim through the air. "Let's talk in here." Occam motioned to a door that led to a back office. Inside the room there was 2 chairs facing each other and a small coffee table between them. Ricky looked out the window and saw the cars slowly slide along the road, oblivious to the difference in speed. "How is this possible?" Ricky asked. "How is anything possible?" Occam circumvented. "Anything isn't possible. There are limits to what humans can do without the laws of physics," Ricky replied. "There has to be some way that we sped up to relative to everyone else, or is it possible everything else slowed down? Technically, there isn't a difference. The only thing that's changed is how we perceive time relative to how others perceive time." Occam's answer only confused Ricky. "Who are you?" Ricky asked. Occam stood silently for a second, then gestured Ricky to the seat. Ricky looked at the chair. It looked normal, if a little worn out of shape. In fact, it looked like it was shimmering. Ricky cautiously sat down. The chair was strangely far away. As he sat, he felt the distance between himself. The distance he felt himself fall through to reach the chair seemed to grow wider, and the chair bigger. He felt himself fall forever, and yet while falling, he feels as though he was sitting. He closes his eyes and imagined the act of sitting. Suddenly he saw himself in a white void, sitting in the chair. He looked at Occam, and Occam was there, sitting in his chair. "You asked who I was." "I did." "That question is complicated. You don't have a frame of reference for what I am." "Then I'll ask where we are." "We are in a space that can provide that frame of reference. It can provide a lot of things. For example, right now we are communicating through words themselves, rather than actual sound waves." "Is that why everything I say is in italics and everything you say is underlined?" "Yes, you catch on quickly. So is there a reason we came here to talk? What's with sound waves? What's wrong with sound waves?" "Because I can do this." The 3D projection of a galaxy appears to Ricky and Occam. Wow, holy shit. "Here exists the narrative in 0 time, meaning the beginning and end of our conversation happens at exactly the same time. This is the most efficient way to communicate, as it doesn't use any of our lifespans." I never thought about a conversation taking up lifespan. Sorry. "Back to this galaxy. This is me, before I was born." "What, do you mean you were born in this galaxy?" "I was the galaxy. The specifics are complicated, but this region of space had a lot of sentient life in it that all agreed that the best course of action was to form one single entity." Ricky existed for a moment between this and the next, and contemplated the reality of what was happening. His feelings were hard to structure, since he felt nearly everything that Occam said had to be true. He had no actual reason for this beyond the fact that existence around him seemed to have broken down into raw information. I want to know something. Earlier you said you weren't God, right? Yes, because that is not my name. Do you know if he exists at all? Occam looked for a moment like he was staring through Ricky. Ricky stared back with a hopeful glaze in his eyes. He had never believed in God, but he longed to be told that he had taken the wrong path, and there was someone watching over him. The creator of the solar system stopped active involvement with its development approximately 5 years after its genesis. So in a sense there was a God, but he doesn't seem interested with the going-ons. Ricky fell silent. That wasn't the answer he wanted to hear, and it wasn't the one he was expecting either. The silence rang out, and with that Occam took Ricky out of the void. Instead of appearing in the office, they reappeared in front of Ricky's high school, with time seemingly still at a near standstill. Come visit me again when you've thought about what I've told you, Occam said, as he stood up and extended a hand to Ricky. I would like to help you any way I can. Ricky, discombobulating from his first experience breaking the laws of physics, shakily took Occam's hand and pulled himself out of the chair. Occam didn't budge an inch as this happened. I'll, try, Ricky blurted out. Occam sat back down in the chair, snapped his fingers, and disappeared. The moment he left, time returned to normal speed for Ricky. He stared up at the school clock. 7:56. Unbelievable. Ricky couldn't focus on anything during classes. At lunch, he saw George sitting with his football buddies. He went over to them. George, can I talk to you for a second? Ricky asked. He wanted to tell him what happened, what he had learned. It seemed too momentous not to share. George didn't contest. He simply stood up from the table and went outside with Ricky. I think I met an alien or something on the way to school, Ricky said suddenly. George raised an eyebrow. It's true, Ricky protested. George looked Ricky in the eyes for a moment. He couldn't tell when Ricky was genuinely telling the truth or not. What happened? Ricky went into detail about his encounter with Occam. Every second he spoke, George looked more and more confused. Finally, he got to the end about God, and George had it figured. Is this all a stupid atheism bit? Really? Dude, you need to stop with this. I have my faith. You don't. Can we please just avoid the subject? George sounded really annoyed with Ricky here. It was true that they had debated about God in the past, but this time Ricky was telling the genuine truth, and he could not convince his only friend. Ricky took a deep breath. You can choose not to believe me, but I swear on my life, George, this happened. Lunch ended shortly after that. For the rest of the day, Ricky kept noticing his foot, unable to stop tapping the floor. After school, Ricky went back to the strip mall. He couldn't keep himself away. The storefront was different when he got there. The lights were on, and the floor was no longer pulled up and destroyed. The displays now housed works that looked to Ricky like abstract art. Ricky stared at the front window, at a painting that looked like a landscape of a far-off planet. The way the paint shimmered against the sun made the effect of a diamond sky. It's beautiful, isn't it, Ricky? Occam startled Ricky with his sudden question. Ricky turned to face the man behind him and laughed. Yeah, it's amazing. When in the world did you get it? Occam stood in repose for a second, as if he was pondering a way to break unfortunate news. To be quite honest, Ricky, this art came from you. It's a byproduct of the dimensional break room. Ricky realized that Occam was talking about the back office and the weird chairs. He looked back at the art and back at Occam with a clearly puzzled look on his face. Occam, reading this, beckoned him inside. Ricky followed eagerly. Take a look at this. Occam pointed to what looked like an art exhibit. It was a strange bronze statue shaped like a skewed pyramid with elaborately detailed designs all around it. This is the coffee table from before, Occam explained further. I don't understand. How is this a coffee table? Ricky asked. Upon closer look, the designs on the outside were incredibly hard to discern. It looked like a crystalline pattern from some angles and from others an orbital one. As he got closer, he could see that the lattice of the bronze was more detailed than it looked, and as he moved his head away, he could see the shapes had a definitive form like bricks stacked together. From a certain angle, he could vaguely see the resemblance to what it used to be, a coffee table. Occam grabbed a side of the coffee table and opened it like a door. Inside, the statue had another piece of exotic art. This one was abstract, using mostly red and orange as its bases. When you entered this space, we talked in earlier, the space responded to your existence and created this artwork based on your soul. Occam showed Ricky the red and orange painting. Wait, so you pulled me into a different dimension to turn my soul into art so that you could fill up your gallery? Ricky said like he was offended, but honestly he wasn't sure how he should feel about it. No, Occam replied. The art is like the exhaust from a car. It's a byproduct that you have to deal with when you use it. Ricky felt for a moment like he had artistic integrity and that it had just been attacked by that comment. Ricky then remembered that the only art he had ever actually done was the kind that ended with "and crafts." Here's what I'll propose, Occam stated. You can let me house the art here and sell it for you as the listed creator, but you let me keep that one. Occam pointed to a painting that was sitting in the corner of the room. The painting in question was much darker than anything else in the collection. It was a tall piece, with 6 hands, and 3 on each side meeting with each other. The first hands were empty and reaching out to each other. The second hands were both holding knives and stabbing each other, and the last 2 hands had one holding a knife and the other being held up. Ricky looked at the piece perplexed, wondering why Occam would want it. That piece you can have for free, and the rest of them, I'm not sure. He was talking about the red and orange painting in his hand. I mean, I never actually made these. Your coffee table did, Ricky said. He had no idea what else he could do in this situation. Ricky walked through the gallery and looked at all the pieces. He felt a strange connection to each one. Staring at an isosceles triangle, he thought about empiricism and math, and how they were related in a way that he could understand but not place exactly into words. Without sounding wrong, another piece was like word art, with a strange sculpture that seemed incomprehensible. Ricky looked at this piece and felt an odd sense of memory for all the words that he had ever read. He could think back and see the first story ever read to him, word for word in his mind. There was a longer pause than expected between Ricky's last words. Ricky took notice of this and posed a question to break the silence. What could you sell them for? Occam looked like a posed statue standing in the center of the room. His presence emanated a strange aura, the contradiction between his appearance of an old man in heart shades, and his true power and ability was so hard to reconcile in Ricky's mind that he tended to forget who Occam really was. Occam answered with a slow seriousness that lended what he said some serious gravitas. Ricky, these pieces are portraits of your soul coupled with universal knowledge. The value of that would be what you can imagine. I only wish to share what you've created with people. The monetary reward is of no use to me, so I feel it's only fair that you take it. Ricky was stunned to speechlessness. He had no idea what the downside to such an incredible offer could be. He extended a hand, which Occam, not missing a beat, took and shook. You can expect your compensation in the mail, Occam said, walking to the back office. I'll be moving the gallery after you leave, so it may be a little while before we speak again in person. I trust that you know what you're doing, Ricky looked at the clock as he said this and realized that he had spent over an hour at the gallery. I really have to get home soon. Is there anything else you need from me? Occam walked Ricky to the door. I think I have everything I need, Occam said. Ricky walked home, his mind in a fog. The weather was foggy as well. He crunched October leaves under his feet as he walked. The cold air pierced his lungs. The walk sobered him, and he wondered if the storefront gallery would still be there by tomorrow morning. Owen welcomed Ricky despite his tardiness. Owen never seemed to care about curfews or boundaries. There was Chinese food on the table, and Ricky and Owen ate together in a melancholy stupor. Sipping from his beer, Owen asked Ricky what he did today. Ricky, thinking back to his conversation with George, had no idea what to say. I've met this guy at the corner store this morning. He slowed down time and took me to this abandoned store at the strip mall. It was the one in the middle that used to be a clothing outlet. He took me into his back room with his coffee table and 2 chairs, and he asked me to sit and talk with him. The chairs took us to this, other dimension. It was surreal, like I was existing only as information. He explained that God has never really done anything besides create Earth, and that he was like the child of a galaxy of sentient life coming together. When we stood up, we were already at my school, and time was still slowed down. I told George that I met an alien, and he didn't believe me. After school, I went back to the strip club to see if the man was there. He was, and the storefront from before had been completely redone, all brand new, and there's all this amazing art hanging on display. The guy told me that this art was like the exhaust of the interdimensional coffee table, and that he was using my soul to create all these priceless pieces of art that he was going to sell and send me all the profits. He gave me this one piece. Ricky exploded his story at his uncle. Owen tried to interrupt at points with reactions to each of Ricky's additional claims, but Ricky only spoke louder to signal that he wasn't done. At the end of his statement, he brought out the orange and red piece and showed it to his uncle, whose qualms were suddenly halted by a shocked stupor. Ricky watched his uncle stare at the piece for a minute and saw his eyebrows furrow harder and harder till Ricky thought his forehead might burst a vein. The long pause gave him time to give some additional thoughts. I know it seems hard to believe, but you know me, I wouldn't lie about something like this. It actually happened. And I think the fact that I had that entire story completely prepared in a day gives me some credibility, right? Ricky was turning red. He had no idea why it mattered so much that his uncle believed him. But he was so worried about whether or not he did the right thing going back and saying okay to Occam about all the art. Truly, his brain was overloaded by the artwork and the absolute craziness of the day. His heart was now bursting with adrenaline. It was like he had just walked into a den of lions, and before they could even start to attack him, the lions had started doing a dance routine with lights and music and stage effects. To truly feel that emotional roller coaster, one would have to be used to a great deal of shock. Owen stared at the piece of art harder and didn't say anything. To him, the answer to whether or not Ricky said was true was hidden within the artwork. The stress was building harder and harder. Ricky walked up to his uncle and tried to get his attention, his emotions in the moment stacking tenfold as he watched his uncle's intense reaction to the piece. His eyes seemed to glow up with a glowing rage and sadness. He pulled the piece closer, in and out, searching for evidence. The first thing he said, he shouted, "I didn't do it!" Ricky slammed the painting down onto the table and looked at Ricky with a worried and scared look. Ricky stared back at him and then at the painting on the table. He grabbed it, and Owen grabbed his hands to stop him. Ricky stared at his uncle with eyes that seared with animalistic fire. Owen let go and slinked back into his chair, biting his nails. Ricky stared at the piece for a moment or two, trying to understand the message behind it. He knew what was happening. He couldn't believe it. He saw the licks of orange and red, and he thought of the night 5 years ago and his uncle. Ricky looked at Owen with a dagger-like stare. That was all it took. Ricky had seen the question in the painting, and Owen had seen the answer in his eyes. He hurled forward and fell face down on the floor. "Heart attack," said the auburn-haired female paramedic. "Unusually strong one, too. His blood pressures just seemed to shoot up from something. Did you see him react to something?" "He just keeled over suddenly when I told him about my day," Ricky said shakily. For the wrong reasons, but in a way that the paramedic couldn't tell from the turmoil of a death. The EMTs took the body, and Ricky looked at the floor Ricky locked the door after they left. Sorry, I'm like dyslexic a little bit after reading this much. He looked at the painting again and felt the echo chamber of uncertainty of what had just happened reverberate in his mind. The painting didn't give him an answer. It just gave him a suspicion. Owen's death didn't give him justice. It had only given him a stronger heartache. He didn't do it. I've thought about it before, and that's what he saw. He thought I was suspecting him from looking at the painting, and he died from the pain of being accused for a crime he didn't commit, Ricky thought. He died from that? What kind of heart gives out with a clear conscience? He was old. He drinks and smokes. He never had good health in the first place. Maybe he would care about his health if he cared about human life. What do you mean by that? Ricky processed what happened with an argument in his head, the voice of Occam ringing in his ears each time he imagined him talking. Ricky took a long shower and argued with himself more. The art couldn't have done this. The art is it's not just. It was created using technology 1 billion times more complex than anything on your planet. Yet just now, your uncle, he saw that painting of the fire, and the first thing he says in response to all of this is that he didn't do it. Isn't that strange enough to make it considerable? I'm going to bed. The next day, he got a check in the mail from an unknown address. The amount was considerable, and Ricky had to call a lawyer to help him handle the process of cashing it. The lawyer asked a lot of questions, and Ricky gave him a story about an art gallery owner that was selling his works. The lawyer seemed to believe Ricky, thanks to the check, and helped him cash it, as well as file for taxes. Ricky used a portion of the money to keep the lawyer on retainer. No more checks came for quite a while. Ricky had found an article about the auction where his painting was being sold in the paper. An unknown artist Ricky Smith wins $624,000 bid with geometry. Ricky recognized the piece that was sold, as well as the exact amount from the check. The winning bid came from a mathematician who had earned millions using algorithms for calculating growth and capital investments. I'm sorry, I thought I saw like a spider in my mic or something. Ricky didn't see any more mail from Occam in quite a while, during which time he was thankful. He continued schooling and made up with George, opting to agree that his story was a dumb fabrication. After finishing high school, Ricky took up painting as a hobby. When he touched the canvas, he felt relaxed and free from the quiet rumblings of his mind and its dissettlements. Over time, he had amassed a decent proportion of artwork that he felt a great attachment to. The pieces exhibited a great deal of violence and turmoil, in unsettling physical distortions of space. His attempts at landscapes were colorless, drab, and wore down the soul of anyone who saw them. His friends told him that his art needed something else, and Ricky couldn't imagine what it was missing. Sometime later, Ricky got the first mail from Occam that he had seen in 5 years, a large clasp envelope with a lot of papers inside. One of the papers was a letter written by Occam. Ricky, now that you are a good age for it, I think it might be a good time to sell the rest of your art. The rest of the letter explained the need for Ricky to show up in person to galleries and auctions. Occam had not opted to sell the pieces until now, because the artist was someone who was too young for that kind of appeal, so the letter explained. There was a date and a location enclosed, as well as tickets and an itinerary. Ricky felt his brain turn on as he read the letters and plans. He realized that this may be an opportunity to showcase his real artwork, and so he paid to bring a collection of what he considered his best pieces along with him on his travels. Bleh. In Milan, Italy, Ricky was put up in one of the most extravagant hotels he had ever seen, even on the internet. His room was spacious and had silk sheets and a bed cover. Out the window, he could see churches lit by spotlights, and he was taken in for a moment with the sights. The night was young, so he spent time wandering the city, looking at the old architectural feats with a sense of detachment. If only the men that had built this known, Ricky thought. The next day, Ricky met Occam in the gallery, where the showcase was meant to happen. The gallery layout was the same as it was in the strip mall. Ricky looked at the pieces on display for the first time in 5 years with new eyes. He could see now more than ever the artistry of each piece, how they danced in your mind when you stared at them. Occam's voice gave him déjà vu. "It's been quite long for you, I imagine," Occam said. "I must say that personally, the years flew by much more quickly. I had a lot of things going on that I needed to focus on." Ricky was sure that Occam could have snapped time for him forward. It made his mental state loop backward to 5 years ago, to the first auction. "When you sold that first piece, you didn't say anything. You just sent a check," Ricky stated. He had built up a sizable resentment for the influence Occam's actions had caused him, but he didn't have any real reason to blame him, so he just tried to feel out whether or not Occam had known. Okay, sorry, my dog is barking. I'm just going to shut my door. I get to watch myself on my stream walking off and then walk back in. There I am. Hello. Alright. Okay, so I thought that was the deal. Unfortunately, getting that one piece sold was quite the headache. I would have thought it simple, but human behavior patterns are sometimes just a game of probability. Occam's wording lent him the same unavaluable quality that Ricky couldn't lay blame into. "I brought some of my own works. I wanted to see if you could sell them." Ricky pulled out some rolls of canvas from his tote bag. He unfurled a few pieces on some unused section of the floor. Occam stared at the pieces and back at Ricky. Occam thought about the million different ways that the pieces could be used and weighed the effectiveness of those outcomes against the outcomes achievable with his current arsenal. Occam weighed the pros and cons of telling Ricky that the art was worthless to him and decided there was no downside to taking it now and promising to sell it in the future. Ricky felt quite pleased as he walked to this hotel room to do an interview with a reporter about the gallery. He had worried before about the possibility that Occam wouldn't agree to take his artwork, and that his career would be nothing but standing in for the work of a coffee table. Now he felt free to talk to the reporter about his start as an artist and the gallery. "What would you say is the biggest inspiration for your work?" Ricky laughed. "That's a tough one. I guess I would say that my biggest inspiration is my family. I lost my parents when I was 12 to a fire, and I didn't know how I would cope. But my uncle..." Ricky choked. He didn't realize where he was taking the sentence and remembered what happened 5 years ago. And remembering what happened 5 years ago overwhelmed him for a moment. He quickly tried to reattach himself to what he was saying. "My uncle took me in and cared for me until I was 17, when he died of a heart attack." The reporter's face showed pure shock. As Ricky pieced together how morbid his past must have seemed, "I've seen some work of yours, and to be honest, I can understand how that level of grief could have driven you into your work to become a prodigy," the reporter replied. Ricky smiled, stunned. He had never heard someone call him that. What do you mean prodigy? I mean, the work is great, but it's a bit artificial, right? Like, it lacks that human element." The reporter looked over a document that one of the producers held out for her to see on a clipboard. While critics who've seen your work share the sentiment, they believe that you have innate ability well beyond what anyone has brought to the art world before, and at such a young age. The reporter was piling on the compliments in an attempt to get Ricky to share more. His contradictory nature imparted him a personality that people sought deeper insight to. His success as an artist would depend on how well he controlled the narrative. A lot of what's on display at the gallery is some of my earlier work, Ricky lied. I brought some of my newer works as well, so hopefully those critics will get to see more than what's on display today. After the interview, Ricky headed back to his hotel room and got dressed to the nines for the event. His itinerary included a wardrobe and hair specialist that put him in one of the cleanest suits he had ever worn. The hair specialist took his thick black hair and gave him a stylish fade. He looked in the mirror and stared back at what was the picture-perfect ideal of success. That night, during the auction, the pieces came and were bid on in record numbers. The demand was apparently unprecedented, and the final sales were higher than what even Ricky imagined. Ricky watched in dismay as none of the pieces that he brought were taken on stage. The overall take was $1.6 billion with 40 pieces. The specifics didn't rock Ricky's mind. He no longer had any real ability to evaluate the ridiculous. He was just fuming that Occam didn't put any of his pieces on display. Before the final piece on the schedule, Ricky went backstage and took Occam aside, asking why nothing he made was being sold on stage. Ricky didn't stop Occam at any point before the final piece was sold. It was then that all the machinations were in action. Ricky had fallen down slope after slope until the moment when the acceleration had finally stopped. Ricky punched open the door to the gallery that was now empty and missing all the art. In the back office, there was no furniture, only his artwork tossed in the corner with a lack of care. Ricky went back to his hotel and called George. "George, I'm having a crisis of faith," Ricky said over the phone. "What's wrong?" George asked. "Do you have faith in me?" Ricky asked. "Of course I do," George responded. "Then please, I need to tell you something, and you have to believe me. The thing I said about meeting an alien all those years ago was true. I wasn't lying. He was the one who created all the art for my showcase. An alien created art for you and you sold it at auction? That doesn't really sound too bad," George replied. "No, he created art and sold it for me. For me. The auction just ended. All the pieces sold together for $1.6 billion, Ricky corrected and informed his friend. There was a slight pause on the phone and the sound of thumping on the touchscreen of George's phone, followed by an audible gasp. "Okay, so like in a million years, am I actually good enough to sell my shit for that much?" Ricky asked sarcastically. "Of course," George lied, "but I'll believe you enough to let you continue. Listen, I thought the guy was like a gift from the universe. He was powerful, looked out for me, but he also lied to me and wouldn't sell my actual art. He just left it behind without a trace." Ricky was sullen and confused. So George understood his pain, but only in a metaphorical sense. "Well, if what you're saying is true, then I guess it's his problem. You have talent. You don't need an alien to show it off. Just take the money and move on." George felt like his advice was solid. And so did Ricky. They were both wrong, but that couldn't be helped. Ricky came home the next day, and when he got home, he was relieved to see that the checks from the auction had made it home. The taxes knocked down the value significantly, but Ricky didn't mind, since $500 million is still more than enough money to last him a lifetime and a half. On the 14th of the next year, George and Ricky were getting married. The world had changed dramatically in that time. It was like a technical, philosophical, medical, artistic, diplomatic, etc. renaissance. Nearly every field was having major breakthroughs. First it was AI, where a computer algorithm was developed that could learn and make itself smarter. That technology laid the groundwork for solidifying decades of technical implementations for medicinal and production-based industries. Politics had changed dramatically. After a nuclear arms facility had a technical issue that led to a faulty discharge, there was a huge international huff that ended with nearly everyone agreeing to nuclear disarmament. Both politicians running for president in the United States were campaigning on the same issue of establishing world peace. The concept had become increasingly popular since the auction. A crime in the world was dropping. U.S. citizens were willfully melting their guns down. Wars came to peaceful ends. Medicine was curing diseases. Everything was becoming less expensive. It was like heaven on earth. Ricky and George stood at the altar with their friends and family seated on a sunset-lit beach off the Amalfi coast. As they said their vows, a massive shape passed over the mountains. A flying ship as big as the beach itself. It flew over everyone. As it flew over, everyone started fleeing and screaming. Ricky tried to calm people down, attributing this to Occam visiting for his wedding. It wasn't Occam. Occam wasn't done. Occam wasn't coming back. His part was done. I'm reading poorly. I'm sorry. Ricky waved at the ship and smiled. He knew that something this amazing had to be Occam. He had become more and more enamored with him ever since he left a year ago, and Ricky only idealized him more as the world reverberated from his art. He felt so proud and lucky to have ever been his friend. The unflinching ship ejected an object from a hatch that slowly fell directly over Ricky. 6.5 seconds later, the bomb hit the ground, destroying everything within a half-kilometer radius of impact. The ships toured the world, bombing city after city, slowly and with much care. A unified surrender of all political leaders ensured that there was no recourse. If they had only attacked before all the peacemaking, or after people realized that extraterrestrial threats were legitimate. In the end, all humans were eradicated, exactly according to plan. Before the moment of impact, Ricky saw as time slowed down and Occam appeared to him once again, gesturing to the coffee table. Ricky realized that he meant to tell him something and, still unaware that the ship was about to destroy his whole wedding, sat down excitedly. I can't believe you came back. I knew you would, but I just can't believe it. I'm happy to see you again, Ricky. I just wanted to give you back the painting I took from you. I didn't feel right keeping it. The painting of the hands and knives appears to Ricky. I want you to think about this piece before you die, and hold on to the feeling that you have when you see it. By the time Ricky had figured out the meaning, his epiphany meant nothing. He could only ponder the cruel irony that he had trusted a demon as a god. And that's it. That's the story. Aren't you glad y'all tuned in? Yep, me too. Well, that's it. Thank you.